A good red-headed Catholic. In all my years, I never thought I could see such a thing, the burly caretaker choked on the words as he threw another shovelful of dirt into the hole. Not in real life, anyways. I suppose it is rather shocking to see it for the first time, the odd little man said. He hopped up and took a seat atop a nearby monument. But like most things, you get used to it. Not me. Not this. No one could ever get used to seeing something like this. Oh, sure you will. Someday you'll look back on all this and laugh, the visitor replied. Take your job, for instance. Most people wouldn't be able to handle working in a cemetery, but I'm guessing that it's no big deal to you anymore. But that's still a long way from seeing something like this, the caretaker reacted. Here I am. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I still don't believe it. Maybe. The man looked around the small rural cemetery and sighed. Hey, I forgot to ask. Why was it that you were out here anyways? At night, I mean. Oh, I pretty much do everything around here. I dig the graves. I bury the coffins. I pull the weeds. I tend the bushes. I was out here cutting the grass that night because it's cooler. There's no houses for miles, so there's no one to complain about the noise from the mower. It's kind of old, so it's pretty loud. Oh, sure, I should have figured. The stranger tapped an index finger against his temple. The full moon simply made it easier to see where you were cutting. I just got the mower back into the shed when they all pulled up and started digging. The caretaker stepped closer to the hole and stared into it. He lit a cigarette and leaned on his shovel. I got the vault covered now. Not much we could do about it the way they cracked the lid, but I think I pieced it together good enough to keep everything from collapsing, for a few years anyways. The visitor hopped down from his granite perch and looked into the open grave. Satisfied with the progress, he reached into his breast pocket and retrieved a business card. Desecrated Graves Reinterment Society. The caretaker read the card by Zippo light. You mean folks like you do this for a living? People who know about us call us diggers. Truth be told, we really don't do all that much digging ourselves. Not with those pint-sized arms of yours, you sure don't. No matter, my daddy used to say some of us work with our hands, some of us work with our heads, and the good Lord respects both. The man wiped the sweat from his forehead. Pridefully, he rolled up his shirt sleeves as far as his biceps would allow. I'm still not sure how you were able to tie this guy up, much less bring him back here like you did. Even I would have had a tough time handling a fella his size. The rope I use has been soaked in salt water, the reinterment agent explained. In my line of work, salt is a great equalizer. I'm not sure I know what that means, the caretaker frowned. In any case, I sure am glad that you came around. Something like this is bad for business. This is the kind of thing a fellow loses his job over, whether he's responsible for it or not. The visitor matched the other man's scowl. Why do they do it? The caretaker took another lungful of tobacco and blew the smoky breath into the wind. More than likely, this one was just a test. How do you mean, a test? A spell like this usually starts with a good red-headed Catholic, the nameless fellow began. Spell? You mean like witches and stuff? The caretaker asked. That stuff ain't real, is it? The stranger merely pointed into the grave. You buried this guy when? A couple days ago? And here you are, doing it again? The caretaker nodded and rubbed the top of his head. First they seduce a good red-headed Catholic. We're still unclear about what the term good means. We don't know if it means a good head of red hair or if they have to be completely devoted to their religion. The stranger ran his hand over the top of his own pate. We don't even know if they have to be Catholic, but that's what the witches operating in the Americas seem to prefer. The caretaker shivered from something other than the chilly night air. When they finished seducing him, they stringed him up by their feet in the middle of the room. Naked, of course. Of course, the other man echoed. He flicked his cigarette into the hole and continued shoveling dirt. The next part varies as to what is readily available. Some covens use snakes, while others use bees. In the Middle East, they use scorpions. The agent walked around to the other side of the grave. All they need is something that can bite or sting a person to death. They put the creatures in a cloth sack and tie it over the victim's head. My dear God, the caretaker said between shovelfuls. Once they've expired due to the venom, the bag is removed, and the body is left hanging. The little man squatted at the edge of the hole. They put a bowl beneath the victim's head, and after that, about 2 or 3 days, a black viscous liquid begins to seep out of the redhead's nose, eyes, mouth, ears. This is the reanimation potion. Reanimation? I believe some witches call it a resurrection potion, but there really isn't enough thought process left in the newly risen corpse to call it a resurrection, he explained. They might know their name or even where they lived, but not much else. Most of the time they're released like this poor soul was. They get hit by cars, trains too. You see, many reanimates will cross the first rail, but not the second. Then for reasons we have yet to figure out, they just follow the tracks until a train comes along. After that, there's not much left for me to return to their grave, but it's actually the best case scenario. And the worst? The corpse makes its way all the way back home, knocks on the door. Good Lord, the caretaker was horrified. And this potion can do that? Well, the corpse does have to be relatively fresh and mostly intact. A full moon is called for. The agent listed the steps in a almost casual manner. They dig up the body, paint a cross on its forehead with the potion, and recite the Lord's Prayer backwards until what? Until the cadaver wakes up. This one was probably awakened just to test the potion. That's why the coven let him go so quickly. They used him up sexually and then just opened the door and let him leave. No. Again, the caretaker stopped digging. He looked around the cemetery as if making sure no one could overhear him. Sexually? You mean they... But he's dead. Uh-huh. The man rose to his feet and took a new perch at the head of the grave. Wicked things, witches are. As sick as that is, you'd think they'd use fresher bodies. You know, someone who's still in state of rigor. The caretaker didn't seem to understand the man's insinuation. This poor soul, though, the fellow continued, the suture that mortician applied to keep his jaw shut was ripped out of his gums. It's anybody's guess as to why they needed his mouth open. Lord Jesus, the caretaker harpooned his spade into the ground and crossed himself. In all likelihood, they have a different slave in mind, someone specific. They'll make sure this person dies in the right way at the right time of the lunar cycle. They'll wake them up and exploit them until the corpse becomes too decayed to be of further use. The visitor ripped up a handful of grass and dropped it into the hole. They probably chose this unfortunate guy to test their potion because he was convenient, not to mention that he was buried here, 2 hours from the middle of nowhere. There was almost no risk of witness. Except for me, the caretaker worried. Do you think they'll come after me next? No, if they knew you were here, they would have dropped you into the hole and covered it themselves. The fact that they left the grave open for anyone to find meant they assumed no one saw them. I wanted to call the law, but there ain't no signal way out here, the caretaker explained. That and I was pretty scared, so I kept as quiet as I could. We ain't never had nothing like this happen here before. Not for a generation at least, the man whispered and bowed his head knowingly. Say again? Nothing. It's not important. So these witches, the people who did this to him, they just gonna go free? I'm not licensed to handle that part of it. I just make sure that these poor wretches are returned to their graves. The people responsible for rounding up witches are currently shutting down another coven, he explained. Once they're done with that, they'll raid this one, and I'll reinter any trophies they recover. Those that can be identified, that is. What do you mean, trophies? They call them ingredients, the makings for other spells. When they need things like teeth, eyes, or tongues, they go through obituary listings like they were grocery store ads. This time, instead of simply making off with a few fingers, they took the entire body. And what do you think happened to the ginger you mentioned? The one they hung upside down. Odds are that most of that good red-headed Catholic has been cut up, broken down with a ball-peen hammer, and flushed down a storm drain. The rest has been pickled, mummified, or otherwise preserved and saved for later use. The burn unit takes care of the witches, and I take care of any remains they find. Burn unit? That's what we call our capture and disposal team, the burn unit. I think I understand. Once again, the caretaker looked around for unlikely eavesdroppers. Hey, you ain't gonna tell no one I covered up this grave the first time, are you? You know, when it was empty. I couldn't stop a gang that big from taking the body, and I didn't want to lose my job over this. No worries, my friend. I don't even know your name. So how could I report you? The visitor walked over and patted him on the shoulder. With his other hand he placed a fold of bills into the man's breast pocket. And I sure as hell ain't going to tell nobody about you, the caretaker assured as he collected the bills from his pocket. He was so preoccupied with counting the money that he didn't even notice that the business card he had been given earlier was now gone. I appreciate that, the agent said as he turned and walked away from the gravesite. Hey, mister, this is a lot of money. You've earned it. The caretaker looked on as the odd little man made his way out of the cemetery. Unexpectedly, he felt the sensation that he had not experienced since he first started the job. It was the feeling of being watched by some unseen presence. He quickly rolled down his sleeves, but it did nothing to relieve the sudden cold. Hey, the caretaker called after him. When's this poor fellow going to stop screaming like that? The reinterment agent turned back and cupped his hands around his mouth like a megaphone. The rest of the dirt should muffle it. As soon as he decomposes a bit, and his lungs have too many holes to push air, he'll quiet down. In the meantime, if any visitors come too close to his grave, just start up that noisy lawnmower of yours.